devoted fans. And if they have their own sort of like meta inside lingo and speak the things that they like to do, you just got to embrace it, man. You got to embrace it.
Weird. It's so weird.
They have their battle cries. Plane crash. What's the other one? 2 patrons.
Oh yeah, actually you predicted that one and it did show up.
Yeah, 2 patrons. He's got 2 patrons. Is it patrons? Patreons? I don't even fucking know. He's got 2 patrons. What else? Nobody's brought up my vinyl Kickstarter that I ran many years ago that didn't succeed. It's like there is some. This is the interesting thing, right? This is the way I look at it. And this is what you have to understand. In a world today where everybody cares so much about what they put out and what they project and the image they project, when you're a guy who really doesn't give a fuck about that and you're just incredibly transparent about everything, it's met with such scrutiny and skepticism that people are willing to believe that everything you say is a lie to avoid the idea that you might actually be the only person who's telling the truth, who doesn't give a shit. Like, obviously, I have nothing to gain by making up stories about getting fired from really well-paying jobs or, I'm in another lawsuit. Like, this is my second lawsuit against a company in the last 6 or 7 years. Like, it's not fun for me. It's not an exciting part of my life. But I think it's important that I share the story, and that's why I talked with Isaac, and he wanted to write an article about it and kind of get it out there so that people understand, like, this is not a hypothetical thing. Like, the idea that these Twitter mobs are just Twitter mobs and that they go away, it's not a hypothetical thing. And the difference is, like, I have other means of making money. Like, I'll hustle, whether it's doing rideshare gigs or picking up shows around town or doing brand ambassador work for companies or doing like social media engagement thing, whatever it is. Like, I'll hustle my way to making a living, but there are a lot of other people out there who might just have a blog or a podcast that their work stumbles on someday, and they've worked at a place for 15 years. And that place, like Dick's Sporting Goods, just decides one day to get woke. And now that person gets fired and loses their whole career because companies think, well, if we don't like who they are outside of work, then we'll just fire them. They don't have to work here. And so my concern is that this is something that's only going to grow and get worse for people to where it's like entirely a Big Brother thing, where at some point your choices are to conform to the mainstream and to agree with what everybody's like. Me too. I agree with everything everyone else says, or you can risk losing everything just being yourself.
Right.
And that's a scary world. I don't want to live in that world. So if I can do something, and I don't think I'm a religious guy, but I think I'm spiritual enough to say that if the world keeps pushing me in this direction, where I keep finding myself in these situations where I'm fighting these legal battles in court, then maybe that's my purpose. Maybe what I'm supposed to do is to be the guy who is, fighting these things so that at some point other people don't have to worry about this kind of stuff in the future.
Do you think the companies actually care, or do you think they're just worried about themselves being tarnished by, a rabid Twitter mob or worse?
I don't even think it's that. I really believe that it's just simply, we're going to side with whatever we think is the least risky, right? So they're probably thinking, well, this dude is a straight white male under the age of, and again, I'm not just trying to like dog whistle straight white male shit over and over again, but these are real conversations that human resources departments say. The odds of a jury being sympathetic to a straight white male under the age of 40 are less than, let's say, a black female over the age of 40. And so historically, the law, as it pertains to rights, has this concept and this construct of protected class. Even though the law itself doesn't specifically say it's only designed to protect members of these classes, that's how it's always been applied historically. So I've been in conversations with my HR people where I've tried to take performance action against managers that work for me. And they say, okay, well, we really need to make sure that we have our reporting buttoned up, right? Because this is a female manager, Latino, over the age of 45. So she absolutely is going to have an easier time suing us than somebody who's like a 20-year-old white kid who went to Harvard, right? And so when I've been on that end of those conversations, I know that the legal departments of these companies just look at it and go, okay, well, his chances of winning in court are not as good as maybe somebody else down the line who might complain about this. So we're going to cut our losses and roll the dice and take our chance that person's civil rights won't be upheld in a court of law. And most of the time, people just don't fight it. And so I know the law and I'm going to fight it. And I've got a lawyer who agrees that, yes, the law was broken in this case. Yes, they probably rolled the dice and thought there's a good chance that even if we do have to go to court and we are sued, that we'll still win. And we're trying to call that bluff.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I mean, historically, I would argue that it was the other way around in terms of what classes were protected, right? Like historically, it was much easier to be a white guy in court against a minority, but that's flipped in it's what you're saying, I think, is probably post-affirmative action or something like that. It's kind of the modern woke world. It's actually the other way around. Is that what your argument is?
Well, I think the context of what you're talking about definitely it changes with what it is, right? I still think in criminal cases, it's not beneficial to be a person of color when you're talking about violent crimes or particularly drug possession crimes, things like that. But when it comes to like employment law, absolutely. There is this idea that like this is a white guy in an executive position, a higher level position, you know, all bets are off. The guy we can do whatever we want to him. And no one's going to be sympathetic in a jury. Nobody's going to be sympathetic in a courtroom. So, yeah, I think, and another example is like divorce law, right? I mean, how one-sided is custody law towards mothers versus single fathers, right? I've had situations with friends of mine who have had custody battles with their significant others, and the mother can be like on drugs, not working, huge criminal background, and the father basically has to like be an altar boy to get partial custody with their kids. So there are sections of our legal system that are absolutely biased on race or gender, depending on what chamber of legislation we're talking about.
Yeah, family courts are completely separate from regular courts, and the system is kind of wonky. But you know,
archaic.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to the employment thing, you know, I've been an executive at companies a lot over the past 20 years. And absolutely, those decisions are always had where it's like, well, you know, what's the least risky thing to do here? We know that we have to do something about this situation, whatever the situation is. And yeah, demographic information absolutely comes up because you get worried about, you know, what the likelihood that someone will win in court, what the likelihood that, you know, it'll be perceived a certain way or whatever that is. So those discussions, you know, those discussions absolutely do happen. And so can you just go over your lawsuit for a sec? You're suing the company that fired you like on day 2. Is that correct?
Correct.
What are you suing them for?
Well, the actual entire complaint isn't done yet, but essentially that the gist of the case is that the decision was made particularly around my political beliefs, had nothing to do with being a comedian, had nothing to do with comedy or jokes or any content. It more had to do with somebody looking into my social media and then making an employment decision based off of my political leanings. That's essentially the genesis of the case. And when you see these legal complaints, when they're written out in full, I mean, they're like 30 pages long. And so it goes on to state, here's our case, here's what we're presenting, here's what we know. There are some details I can't reveal because some of them are sort of like aces up our sleeve for the courtroom and for the case. But ultimately, that's it. That's the basis of the case. The case is you guys had plenty of time and plenty of foresight that I was a comedian, that I had this background, that I had done things outside of the corporate space. It's not hard to do a simple Google search and find everything I've ever done. And then you still made the decision to hire me. Not only did you make the decision to hire me, but you created a position specifically for me, which also creates an interesting situation because it's hard to say that I failed to live up to the expectations of the job because you didn't even have a job position created historically before that. So it's an interesting case for all those reasons, right? It's going to be very difficult for them as a company to make a case for anything other than making a biased decision to terminate because of the time. I wasn't even, if I were there for a week, you could say he was here for a week and we just didn't like him. It didn't work out. He wasn't performing well. People weren't responding to his leadership. So when it's day 2, it's very hard to make that kind of case. It's very hard to say that there wasn't some political bias towards my express point of view on certain things online. And that is protected speech in California. There are employment laws that say that if you are making any sort of political speeches or attempting to organize online using social media, your job can't make an employment decision based off of that. And that's clearly what happened in this case. So, it'll be interesting to see how it goes.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how if it shakes out.
All right.
And then I want to.
You haven't filed the complaint yet, but it will be filed, is what you're saying.
No. The initial filing went through 2 weeks ago, but the detailed filing, I think we have somewhere like 60 or 90 days to present our entire filing in full of, here is the entire complaint, the 30-page report of, right. This is what we believe happened. This is what the damages we're suing for. This is the aftermath, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
I was just going to say, as much as I was laughing about this earlier, and I have to laugh at stuff like this, otherwise I find it too frustrating. But you're right about this becoming more common. I have a friend, we've had him on the podcast, Mike Harlow. He's part of actually tonight in Los Angeles. Are you in LA?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in LA tonight, he's speaking on a LGBT walk away panel. And because of his views, which don't fit in with my old the SJW ideology, he's been targeted to some degree online. And he just got his first, it was a rejection letter for a writing job where they said, you're a great talent. They even said, look, you're a very talented writer. Unfortunately, we saw one of your tweets, and it was a tweet. The funny thing is, it wasn't even one of the most offensive things he had said. It was an actual joke. And they said, because of this joke, we don't think you'll fit in here in our inclusive environment. And I know that happens. It just really, it's disappointing to see it, because as he rightly pointed out in much more colorful language than I'm about to, it's not a very inclusive environment at all. If you can't tolerate someone,
sure,
a gay person who's got a different point of view than you think gay people are allowed to have, and he's not the only. When I first started writing about my old belief system, I started getting friends and acquaintances writing me in private, but also strangers who are writing me and saying, hey, a lot of fellow liberals who are afraid to say anything, who are afraid to share certain opinion pieces, who are afraid even to hit like on things on social media because they're afraid of losing their job. And these are people in academia, and these are people in entertainment, like I was in, the people in journalism and who work at social media companies, and just all over the board. And that kind of fear is something that, I think what you're doing, what I hear that you're doing anyway about this, is you're one of those people who take like the slings and arrows in a way to help other people, whether you signed up for that or not. That's what's happened, so that other people maybe can get over some of their fear in small ways. Like, not everybody has to be the target of a social media mob, but you can just challenge this stuff in your everyday life. Get over your fear as much as you can.
Yeah, and sometimes I try to be open-minded. Like when the Food Network thing came up, and kind of pivoting, but kind of not. When the Food Network thing came up, I thought to myself, like, is this really what I want to do? Like, do I really want to be like one of these dorky food show guys? And then the other thing I felt like when the opportunity came along was, I was like, man, I feel very lucky to get this. I feel like I haven't necessarily earned it. I feel like I haven't necessarily done enough to earn this opportunity. Like, I have friends that have worked way harder, and this is their actual dream job, and they're not being offered this. And I had a good conversation with my friend Chris about it. And Chris was like, dude, you have time to earn it for the rest of your life. Like, what you do with it is being appreciative of it, making the most of it, and trying to maximize that opportunity is how you earn it. And so sometimes you just have to listen to the universe and let it steer you where it's steering you, because sometimes that drives you to your greater purpose. And I try to be open-minded to that. I try to think like, no, listen, would I much rather have this never happened and still be pitching shows and still be doing stand-up and have never even gotten to the point where I was looking at getting back into corporate America and doing all those things? Yeah,
and you
maybe.
lost your agents, right? You lost your whole team.
Yeah. My whole team walked away when this happened. Would I like my life to be easier? Absolutely. But I'm also trying to listen and find purpose in the difficulty. I'm trying to listen to what's happening and trying to say, okay, if the world keeps pushing me into this place of, listen, do you really care about comedy? Do you really care about free speech? Do you really care about that as a value? Well, then go fucking fight for it. And if that's where the universe is pushing me, then I owe it to myself and to the other people that want to do this kind of stuff to listen. And listen, there shouldn't have to be a distinction between being an open mic comic and being somebody who has an HBO special. Comedy is comedy. And the idea that, well, you're not professional enough as a comedian for us to discount what you say as comedy, so we're going to use it to make an employment decision. I don't want that to happen to my friend who just started doing comedy a week ago any more than I want it to happen to somebody who's been doing comedy for 25 years. And then, at some point, like, shouldn't you be able to retire and go back to living a normal life? A great example is like Al Franken. The guy stopped doing comedy many, many years ago, got into politics, and then people pulled up something that he was doing on a comedy tour and tried to say like, oh no, this is indicative of who he is as a senator, get rid of him. And he just dove on the sword. So, I try to listen to, the universe, as people say, and make the most of it as I can and fight what battles I can fight.
So the thing that you mentioned Al Franken, and it's something where I'm cool with comedy being edgy and whatever and offending people. I think that's great and it's free speech, and I wouldn't want to put anyone in jail for doing anything otherwise. Do you think there's a line though where that you can cross? Like Al Franken had, the story was she was unconscious and he was like fondling her, right, and taking pictures of it. Can comedy be used as a cover to just justify misbehavior? Maybe.
Maybe. I guess it depends on the only people who could ever tell you that though are the people that actually do it, right? The people like I can't pontificate on what his intent was or what the context of that was. I can tell you that personally, a lot of the times when I'm doing comedy, I'm not using it as a cover to be like, let me really get this, like, let me dog whistle real ideas that I have out into the world. I really try to write material that presents opposition to the mainstream of how people think, whether it's what I think or not. And I used to use this phrase all the time. I'll use it again. I don't care what people think. I do want them to question how they think. And I do want them to question, well, if I believe this, why do I believe this? And come up with a ruling on it that's based off of your own investigation of what you believe you know. And so I try to write jokes that steer people towards reevaluating why they have the opinions they have. But at the end of the day, I really don't give a shit what people think. Like they're going to leave that show either feeling changed or digging in their heels even more to what they already believed. And so you can only do with that 10 minutes or 15 minutes of comedy what you can do. But for me, it's really just about making jokes that compel you to think differently. That's what I loved about comedy growing up when I would watch Chris Rock or I would watch George Carlin, the guys that really had a genius way of writing comedy that didn't necessarily tell you that what you think is stupid, but they might have given you enough jokes where you arrived at that point yourself and went, oh man, why do I think this? This is stupid.
I was just going to ask about that because I've certainly had experiences in the past where I've laughed at a comic who I kind of knew was disagreeing with some belief that I had, but I couldn't help myself because they were doing it in a way that made me laugh. And it did make me question my beliefs afterwards and go off and think like, well, is there a grain of truth at least to this? Maybe, or sometimes I would, realize why, but often laughter is so visceral and subconscious that it's really difficult to force yourself to laugh at stuff that is, quote, correct, right? If it's not actually funny. You can't just go in, I don't think, maybe social justice warriors on the chat can tell me otherwise, but I don't think that you can go in and say like, I'm super woke, so I'm going to laugh at this stuff that's said whenever there's like super woke stuff. I'm going to laugh at it, even if it's not funny. They end up just clapping.
They clap a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of applause. It's more like working to an applause break versus working to laughter.
Right. So there's something, there is something particularly valuable about comedy in that it bypasses often the part of your brain that's kind of analyzing from a rational perspective how to respond to this, and instead is just kind of an emotional, visceral response.
Yeah, and I love comedy that makes me rethink what I think, and I think the best comic at that is Jim Jefferies. Jim Jefferies has very, very sort of leftist ideas about things, particularly gun control, right? And he did a bit on, I think it was 2 specials ago or maybe 3 specials ago. It was called Bear, Bare. And on the cover of it, he's like naked. But he did this like 10 or 15 minute bit on gun control and why the push for keeping the Second Amendment by Americans is stupid. And at the end of it, it was so well done. I was like, he makes a lot of good points. Like that there really is kind of dumb that we care this much about guns or that we're doing that stuff. But I could literally listen to that bit and enjoy it and laugh. And it did make me stop and question, like, okay, well, what do I really think about the Second Amendment? Is it really that important to me? Is it really? So whether it changes your mind or not, the fact that comedy has the power to do that, to get you just to stop and think about what you think. I mean, you couldn't argue that we need it now more than ever before in society.
Oh, I think absolutely we do. Yeah.
Well, that's why I was in it. I loved comedy that, for me at the time, I'm like, I like comedy that makes people think about racism and sexism and homophobia and in different ways. And the issue is that I think it still has to be funny while it does that. And so much of it now is just didactic or whatever. It's just like, let me preach to you about what you should believe. And, go ahead.
And sometimes it's hard to get to that point, right? Like, I'll give you an example. So when I was driving Uber a couple of years ago, and I was driving these 2 gay guys, and they were having an argument in the back seat. And it was kind of funny to me because the one guy said, the other guy was like, shut up. And the other guy said, you don't tell me to shut up. And then the other guy said, well, I'll tell you to shut up if I want to fucking tell you to shut up. And he goes, you don't tell me to shut up. And he goes, I'll fucking tell you shut up. And they just went back and forth. And then all of a sudden, the one dude fucking belted the other dude across the face, right? And my initial reaction was like, holy shit, this is funny. And then I had to stop myself and go, wait a minute, if this was a husband and wife, I would absolutely not have the same reaction. Like, I wouldn't laugh at that. I would be like, holy shit, now I got to take you guys to the police station because you can't beat your domestic partner in public. But there's that moment of trepidation where I was just like, nah, it's 2 dudes. And he told him not to tell him to shut the fuck up. So, we find ourselves in these moments in society that make us question, like, why do I have that bias? Why do I look at it differently? Why did I look at 2 men in a domestic dispute completely differently than I would look at a man and a woman? And is that right? Is that okay? I didn't know how I felt about it in the moment, but that's something I would later go on and take and go, okay, can I make this funny? Is it funny? How do I make a joke out of this? Because I want to bring the audience to that same place of being uncomfortable. But in a way, you sort of can't reveal the turn until the end, or else they'll, they know what's coming. So the real art is in comedians who can take those real life experiences and bring you on a journey where it's almost like, what moment I remember in a movie was like in that movie, A Time to Kill, at the end where Matthew McConaughey does that amazing monologue. And then at the end he goes, and now imagine she's white. Basically pointing out to the audience that the entire time they're thinking of this horrible atrocity, they're still remembering that this little girl is black, and they're still remembering that they have a different set of what's okay for that girl than they would with a white girl. And I remember seeing that as a young kid and being like, holy shit, that's a profound feeling to be reminded that you have an implicit bias in the way you're looking at something, and it sneaks up on you. And I've always tried to write comedy that does that. And I don't always succeed. Sometimes I write shit that bombs out and I never do it again. But that's the kind of stuff that interests me. And I would hate for comedy to come to a place where people just can't even attempt that kind of stuff because they might lose their job.
Aren't we already there, though? I mean, we're already there.
Yeah. I mean, it might be too late, right? But we can at least try to fight to fight against it.
So you and I chatted before the show about, I guess we were lamenting a little bit about late night comedy and clapter instead of laughter. But maybe the right thing is to let the networks die and start doing stuff online and let that take over. I mean, we there's no reason why that has to be saved. Just let it die. It'll die eventually because it's not funny. So who cares?
Yeah, I agree. I think the difficulty though is when all of the channels of distribution are just monopolized by one type of content. I think it definitely sets the stage it definitely makes it more difficult. It definitely sets the stage for opposition. But the thing that concerns me is the idea that it just sort of indoctrinates an entire culture of young people, as if to say, well, this is the right way to think because this is what's on television, and that other stuff lives on the internet and lives in the dark channels of the internet.
But the young people don't watch television.
That's true.
That's the thing, right? I mean, I just looked this up the other day because I was curious about it. Like people like Sargon of Akkad have just as many subscribers as CNN has viewers. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I think if you're a young kid, you see CNN in the airport, but other than that, you're not watching this shit elsewhere.
Yeah, you're right about that.
So, I mean, fuck it, start your own YouTube channel, I guess is my point. If you want to get
and listen, some of the problem I have with that too, of just like, everyone's like, you got to make content. I really struggle with the whole making content for the sake of making content thing. The difficulty I have is that a lot of my ideas aren't like just talking through them. I don't have radical, crazy ideas about things. I think the only thing that I can do that's a little bit different is how I can divulge those ideas comedically. And that's what I try to do on my podcast, The Implications of Josh Denny. We try to have episodes where I almost sort of like backdoor incept ideas of what I think through absurd premises, right? Like the newest episode is about incest. And we get into this whole conversation about actually the cures for society might actually be in incest. And of course we're being crazy. But the funny thing is sometimes as you're joking around with things and you comedically riffing back and forth with other comics or other guests, you can arrive at a point that neither of you thought of. And you go, oh my God, that's an unintended consequence we didn't foresee, or that's a hilarious byproduct of this. And so that's what interests me. And that's the kind of stuff I like to do where, we're being silly and we're being funny. And if we make a good point, it's almost by accident.
Yeah. It's hard to actually have conversations that are authentic on the internet if you're worried about what people are going to say, because you'll fuck up and you'll say things that are wrong or that you don't believe
all the time.
Change your mind. And like Jordan Peterson had this problem, right, where he after the Kavanaugh thing, he tweeted something about like, well, maybe Kavanaugh should step down. Maybe that's the best thing. And a lot of people got mad at him. And I don't agree with that sentiment either. I don't agree with his idea. But and I have other issues with Jordan on a couple of topics, but that's not the point. The point is
his all meat diet.
Huh?
His all meat diet, for instance. I can't imagine.
I could get behind that possibly. The only thing is that I would need. I need to eat pizza. It's a staple. So
agree. I just listen. It's give me pizza or give me death, because I couldn't. Like if pizza was off the table, I'd be the first guy just diving off of the tallest building in town.
Yeah. So anyway, it's hard to kind of have those. It's hard to think out loud online without just having people take shit out of context, especially if you're kind of joking. And if you're kind of experimenting with joking, you need to get rid of the filter and let yourself just kind of riff. And that's a dangerous, vulnerable thing to do, because you'll have people come along and grab something and be like, oh, he really means this because he said it. And it's like, well, he was speaking unfiltered, he was thinking out loud, or he was trying to be funny, and he whatever, recognizes that it wasn't right, but they won't let you live it down. And then sometimes they demand apologies for things that shouldn't be. Like, I saw your tweet. I know you talked about this at the beginning. I was kind of half not paying attention because I was trying to fix the technical issues on our side. But, I see your tweet, and like, it was a valid point. Like the term straight white male is being used derogatorily. Is it as impactful as the N-word and as horrible? Obviously not. But
yeah, and historically, absolutely not. I mean, and I think, as everybody's pointed out, like, that's where you went wrong and making the point. But it's like, yeah, but in a way, yeah, I understand that. That's what made it an unpopular take, right? Was the comparison. But you kind of can't make the comparison. It's like in for a penny, in for a pound. If you're going to make the comparison, make it all the way. If you make a half-ass comparison, then no one's going to see it, and no one's going to talk. And by the way, like, this tweet, when it happened, got something like 35 million impressions in 48 hours. people saw this, people talked about it, it got memed, it became a thing, and people will look back on it and go, oh, holy shit, like he was a little onto it ahead of time. Like my thing that I say all the time now is I wasn't necessarily wrong, I was just early, because it's only continued to grow. And you know, like I can't tell you how many articles I've read about Buttigieg and is the fact that he's gay enough to overcome that he's a white male. Like, I mean, those are real articles out there that you can read. Is Buttigieg being gay enough to overcome white male for us to elect him as I mean, it's like, it's fucking insane.
I have to laugh about this again because it's so frustrating. I mean, I'm a lifelong Democratic voter until this past November, the midterms, the first time I've ever voted for a Republican. But the reason I did was because I looked at the candidates and I was like, well, this guy is actually, I know he's the Republican, but he's the most liberal option, because the other guy, Beto, was kowtowing to this belief system. And now you see all of the candidates, it's so disappointing. All the Democratic candidates, we've talked about this on the show, with the exception of probably Tulsi Gabbard and maybe Andrew Yang, are speaking this identity politics ideology. It's not liberal.
Right.
You're speaking racism and sexism, and it is an identitarian form of Marxism. And that is in some cases, depending on who you're running against, you're going to be the least liberal candidate running as a Democrat.
Sure.
And that's really disappointing. And you're right. It is. There are actual pieces out there ranking. I told Carter the secret, which was a lot of times SJWs, maybe it's not a secret, they just vote based on how many marginalized boxes you check off. So unless you have a strong opinion one way or the other. So back when in the 2016 primaries, I was living in California, where I just moved, but for the primary, I was still in California. Mm-hmm. And I voted for Sanders. I had a strong opinion, a strong preference for him. But when it came to everyone else, I didn't really take the time. And I seriously went down and I did what people in my echo chamber do, which is I can't remember if I voted for Kamala Harris or not, because I can't remember if I ranked her higher than the Latina woman she was running against. You know,
right.
Which one is most marginalized?
It's how you decide, right?
Messed up. What?
How racists vote.
Yeah, well, it's literally like you're holding up color swatches and you're like, I guess I'll go with the darkest one. So how is that any different than like the way that people pick slaves out hundreds of years ago? I mean, that's the point, is in this pursuit of getting it right, we're getting it the same kind of wrong, just on the other end of the spectrum. And, you know, if progress means we just make the ruling class a subhuman class, like if the solution is that eventually white men are 3/5 of a person, is that progress, or did we just swing the pendulum? And people go, and when you say things like that, by the way, people go, oh, you're out of your fucking mind. Like, white men have had it good forever. That's so far away from ever happening until it happens. And then everyone will go, then that Denny was a fucking prophet. And it will be laughing about how right I was all the way to internment camps. It's like, I swear there were probably Jews in World War II that were just like, I feel like this Nazi thing's getting a little bit out of control. And everyone's like, shut up, Jews. Enjoy your money. Things are fine. Nothing's going to happen. It's a little fucking men's club over there. They like their brown uniforms and they're marching and their rallies. They're not anything. And then next thing you know, they're on the trains. And they're like, I fucking said this. I said this was going to happen.
It's so, but you're right. It's true. It's the people who are, I always have this question where they try to redefine sexism and racism, right? You know, so they teach, and I learned this in college where I was indoctrinated 20 years ago, that, you know, sexism equals prejudice plus power, racism equals prejudice plus power. And then they define power not on an individual level, like on your ability to inflict force, but on a collective level, like which groups you belong to, that determines how much power you have. And so when you're arguing with someone who's bought into this redefinition, and they say, well, that's not actually racism, that's just prejudice because it doesn't have societal power behind it. That's just prejudice. Well, my question is always like, that's semantics. I don't care if you want to call it just prejudice. When are we going to stop being okay with just prejudice? Like, do we have a discernible endpoint? Is there a goal? Is there a measurable end goal in the future, which we're like, okay, we can stop being just prejudice now against this particular, or we can stop being just prejudice against men now. Everything's cool now. There is something inherently, dangerously, obviously wrong with making exceptions for judgments based on sex and race, and having no kind of plan for when that ends, or it's okay for you now, when is it not okay for you? Like I don't know. It doesn't, they don't think through it logically though. They buy into it because the tolerance we talked about. It's like that intolerance is being sold as tolerance, and they use people's desire to be good and do good and to not be sexist and racist to get them to accept all this bullshit.
Right. You're 100% right.
I think they use their insecurity. It's not a desire to be good, right? Lots of us have desires to be good. You can only be a social justice warrior if you're scared about what that means and you get your idea of good from the crowd around you, right? Because it doesn't make any sense. You have to be nervous about whether you're good or not, and look around you and go, well, these people seem to think the way to be good is to virtue signal by yelling about, whatever it is. But that's why I think if you have a stronger set of moral beliefs and you're confident in them, it's actually very difficult to turn you.
Yeah, and the other thing that we kind of discount too is the role that technology has played in all of this. So when you say like, well, what is it about our society that has now made people want to be more agreeable? Well, it's all documented right on Twitter, right on Instagram. Like the more popular the ideas you espouse, the more likes you get, the more retweets you get. So look at the social media strategies of like A-list celebrities. Nobody's rocking the boat. They're all just like, yay for this, and we got to do something about that. It's all about taking populism of the people that are on social media, and all you're doing is creating an echo chamber of popularity, and then you're taking that data of clicks and likes and retweets, and you're selling it to a brand, a cosmetic brand or a fitness brand, to give you money to promote your stuff. So there is a financial monetary incentive to agreeing with the crowd that never existed before. And it's definitely more difficult. But I agree with what you said earlier, Carter. I think the pendulum is shifting to where contrarianism is coming back into popularity, and you're starting to see contrarian thinkers be able to build their own platforms and create a following. Somebody like Sam Harris, who's to me just an outright contrarian in a lot of ways, even though he's kind of hard to put in a left-right bubble or something. He's just had popularity because of his willingness to challenge status quo ways of thinking. And Jordan Peterson, same thing. People that are willing to be unpopular to talk about what they think and believe are starting to show you that there's a market for that too.
The funniest thing to me is that they all think that all the kind of mainstream woke people think that they're rebels. They're like, oh yeah, like they call them, even the anti-Trump, they got a lot of problems.
They're the resistance.
Like, they're the resistance. I'm like, what the hell are you resisting? You're in power. Like every major institution is on your side. You're not
right.
You're not resistance at all. But it's I don't know. They feel like they're courageous by like virtue signaling on Twitter. I mean, the courageous thing is to say stuff that people disagree with. The courageous thing is to do things that might get you banned or fired or, whatever it is. It's not courageous to virtue signal about, I don't know, hating straight white males, for example.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, if I go to an open mic in Hollywood tonight, and Keri could probably agree with this, I bet I could watch a dozen comedians make jokes about straight white males or oppressive male power or just these sort of things that everyone kind of agrees upon. And it's interesting. I did a Montreal audition last year. This was like right before the controversy happened. And I remember going up on stage and doing a bit that I have about slavery that's on my album. It's a little different now than it was when I recorded it in 2012. But I basically take a moment and kind of highlight in the joke that when I say slavery, the audience's automatic presumption is black. And I kind of poke fun at that.
Yeah.
And it was interesting that there was a black comedian went up after me, a really funny guy by the name of Ron Taylor. And his actual response was, I don't know if that was brilliant or racist. And I feel like he was speaking on behalf of the entire room, where the room went, oh, he said black people, so we assume it's racist. But we don't, now that we're thinking about, is it racist? Because he's highlighting what we thought and not what he thinks. And it was like literally watching a room's head explode of trying to figure out this joke hit these trigger words that we're supposed to react to. However, it's making the point that he just made. So it's really weird how it's almost like a cannot compute reaction that people have when you challenge the status quo of how we look at these things, right? Like if diversity and inclusion means that we end up putting in people in deeper categories with more and more labels, is that really better? Because I want a society where we talk about individualism. I want to go to a world where if I want to know what your experiences are as a person, I have to have a conversation with you. I don't get to just decide what it is because of your skin color and your gender and your age. And in a lot of ways, that's what I was protesting with that tweet a year ago. I was saying, listen, I'm not a straight white male in the way that all of you guys are lumping straight white males together. I had a different experience growing up, a different life, and you're creating a world where none of that matters and none of my individuality matters and none of who I am matters, because now you're creating this stereotype of evil and I'm being lumped into that.
Yeah. And unfortunately, not to get dark on this, but a lot of I would say a lot of young disenfranchised white males who aren't deeper thinkers about any of this, they get presented with an option. You either can join the left in their identity politics and realize that you're always kind of subservient at the bottom rung and guilty, and by virtue of being white and male and that's all, you always be like a second class citizen in that realm. And then on the other side, you've got we've said this before, but on the other side, you've got like the Richard Spencer type crazies who are saying, oh yeah, that identity politics is right. Just come to our side where.
Right. And I don't want there to only be those two choices. There can't only be those two choices.
Of course not. And they didn't, both of those choices. Look, I think 30 years ago, both of those choices seemed pretty ridiculous to most people in the US. And now, though, that seems to be the assumption that those are the only two choices. And there's no, I was telling Keri the other day, I want a party that's like the leave us the fuck alone party. The people who are just like, look, we're not part of any of these things. We want to treat people as individuals, get the hell out of our lives and off of our backs, and let us have voluntary mutual relationships with anyone we want.
The problem with that, Carter, is the leave us the fuck alone people are not going to get outside their homes and organize into a party.
Yeah, that's very true.
They may eventually.
Well, and then the funny thing is, by being part of the leave us the fuck alone party, which I feel like I am, I'm a self-proclaimed libertarian. But the funny thing is, the minute I started talking about my lawsuit, people will come into the chat, or they'll go to my article. They'll be like, oh, the libertarian who doesn't want laws now wants the law to protect him. Ooh, who's hiding behind the government now, libertarian? Isn't the free market able to do whatever the fuck it wants? So you can't win. Like, no matter which, even if you're on the leave me the fuck alone team, people are going to be like, oh, I thought you wanted to be left alone. Now that people are kicking down your door and raping your family, you want the police to come? It's like, can we just have a real, a rational conversation? Yes, libertarianism does not mean the government goes away entirely and it's the old West.
Even if it did, yeah, no, I do want that eventually. But even if it did, I believe that if society was ready for that, which we're not, a lot of those institutions would arise in an alternate manner from what we now call the government. And so you would effectively have a lot of the same things. You would even have things I don't like you'd probably have a lot of same municipal codes, because they would end up just being codified in title transfer between property and insurance companies and all that. Like, it would end up kind of de facto very similar in a lot of ways. So, but the idea that you're not in a limited government world. You're not in a free society. So the idea that you also can't use the apparatus of the state when it's being used against you is pretty silly. Although in your case, I don't think it's the apparatus of the state being used against you, but that's a separate issue.
Well, and really, listen, I just want us to get to a point where we're applying the law consistently across the board, right? Like, the reality is, if I were a gay black comedian, no company in their right mind would ever fucking do what happened to me to a person espousing their beliefs with that identity. And I listen, I'd be willing to bet we could probably go through, the company I work for is small, but their parent company is very big. I bet we could go through the social media of everybody that works in their entire organization, and you'd find a lot of tweets like mine from other people that belong to different identity groups that aren't professional comedians. And I bet they still have jobs. So the interesting thing is like, again, companies want to cherry pick who the law should apply to and who it doesn't apply to. And all of it is just rolling the dice at the craps table. They're trying to find the path of least resistance. They're going, okay, how do we not get sued? And if we have to get sued, what's the least amount of damage that we could take from being sued? And so they're just playing that game. But I would rather companies just operate with integrity and get it. Like, I remember having a conversation with the Food Network when many of these trolls that are in our chat right now messaged the Food Network and tried to show them tweets and jokes like right after my show got announced. So a lot of people were like, oh, he doesn't have a TV show. That's not happening. That's a lie. And then the TV show gets announced and the trailer comes out, and then people automatically get pissed off and start sending in emails going, this person's a racist comedian. The reality is, he knows this. Every futures contract comes after a full background check and a full vetting is done of the talent. So everything that they found in my history as a comedian, they signed off on when they gave me a TV show. 100%. And there are legal documents that show that, right? Which is why Food Network didn't comment on my controversy at all, because then they would have to own up to the general public. Why did you give this guy a show when you knew all of this? Well, the reason they did is because Food Network is not in the business of appraising comedy. They're not a comedy network. They're not in the business of comedy. So the best thing they could do is go, listen, that's a whole different network's ball game. We don't comment on that. We don't get involved in that. And what comedians do as comedy is their own thing. That's not our business. And if more companies took that approach to comedy specifically, then I think we'd be in a place where the law is more consistently applied. But the problem is, people want to take comedy now and say, like, these are manifestos. This is like this. These are your personal beliefs, no matter how absurd the context is of what you're talking about.
Right. Suddenly tweets, jokes, analogies, all those things are treated as position papers on your moral outlook on life.
Right.
Hey, so I just so people know, I have trouble reading the chat normally with these things because I get distracted. But I just peeked in there, and there's a ton of comments from these people who followed you. But one of the things they just keep repeating, and we didn't get to tell it because I think I interrupted you. Oh, look, there's some of our regulars in there. That sucks. They're in there with those. Oh, well. Anyway,
psychopath.
I closed the chat because I have everything they brought up. I talked to him about before the show, and
right. It's just boring. Yeah, the thing they keep repeating is the plane crash. I mean, is it worth it even telling that story again or not?
I mean, it was
the first time I heard it. I don't know.
Is it funny or?
I don't think it's funny or exciting. I mean, I could tell the story again. I almost feel like people want me to keep telling the story and over again so they can find nuances of change. Like, oh, he said this happened the first time, and then the second time he said this happened, and then this happened, so the whole thing is a lie. Yeah, I mean, the story, it's not a very interesting story. I mean, we all have
just make it a big lie, right? Wait,
yeah, let me pivot. First of all, I walked in, I got on the plane, and they were like, you need to fly the plane. I was like, I've never flown a plane before. And they were like, well, you look like a guy who flies planes, and you're all we have. It's either you or a Taliban looking guy, and they don't trend well. If we let him fly, the whole place is going to freak the fuck out. So they asked me to fly the plane. I didn't know what I was doing. It started to go down. That's the end of the story.
Right. Now, when did you deliver CPR to the dying baby? Was that while you were landing, or was that after?
Well, the problem is there were a group of passengers that were restless in the rear of the plane who actually, because, they were training me in on flying and everything in the middle of the flight, they were freaking the fuck out, and it started to get very Lord of the Flies, and they tried to eat one of the babies. They whipped up like a hibachi in the back. They were fully ready to cook this baby, and I had to stop flying the plane. That's what autopilot is for. Run to the back, resuscitate the dying infant, and then, naturally loads of applause hurled upon me. And then I made my way back to the cockpit.
I assume you did some MMA on the cannibals back there too, right?
I mean, a little bit of listen, not a lot of MMA, just my Hodger Gracie black belt in jiu-jitsu came into play a little bit. But I don't like to bring that up. I don't like to talk about
those things. No, I know. And it was
a true martial artist does not brag about their lethality. So now that we've settled the whole plane crash debate. Was that an exciting enough story for everybody?
That was better than the first time.
Yeah, I'm just listen. Now, this is the thing. Now that like they're literally just, I closed the chat as well like 5 minutes ago because I was just like, it's just redundant and the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
But now that it's not going to stop, now I'm just going to make up a new story every time.
Yeah, you should.
It's going to be like the Aristocrats, where it's just a new version, and in the end, it's people blowing people. Isn't that funny, by the way? Isn't it funny that nobody ever brings up these self-deprecating tweets when these mobs go down? Like, people are like, you said this about black people. I said, yeah. I also said I would turn gay for someone that owned a yogurt land. Where's the outrage for that? Like, no one cares about that one, right? No one's going, you can't turn gay. And I go, have you had yogurt?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I often view a lot of again, the trolls in the chat aren't social justice warriors. At least they're very adamant about that. So I don't want to.
Yeah, they followed you from somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I don't want to imply that they're SJWs, but a lot of the people I think on the left tend to view I think they tend to view language like magic words, and so they don't really care what they mean. It's just like, oh, are these the magic words that will get the thing to happen? Like, oh, he said these words. Like maybe if we like put these words out in the universe, people will be angry at him. There's not like, they're not analyzing the content of anything you say and trying to figure out the nuance and like, oh, he meant this and blah, blah, blah. We think that makes him a racist or whatever it is, or he said something about yogurt and that makes him anti-gay or whatever it is. They're just like, they know that the yogurt gay tweet, that like those magic words won't have the effect that they want. So they're going to push on the other tweet. It's not I don't think there's a lot of thought. There's not like a lot of analysis behind it. It's just like whichever if calling you Hitler works, great. If calling you, if calling Candace Owens a white supremacist works, we don't care about what it means. We just, we want to react.
They use words as spells, or magic
words or spells.
What will make you shut up?
Yeah, and there are a lot of things. Like the worst thing about all of that is it convolutes the message of like when you try to make actual real points about things that involve politics or race or gender or whatever else. Like, one of the other things that people could go through my Twitter feed and find is that I'm very passionate about the Middle East. And one of the things that makes me passionate about the Middle East is the fact that I have a girlfriend who is an Iranian Baha'i. And so a lot of the presumption when people meet her is that she's Muslim, which she's not. Most people don't even know what the Baha'i religion is, but they also don't understand that the Baha'i faith and the Baha'i people were like essentially like the Armenian genocide. And when the Ayatollah took over Iran during the revolution in the, the 60s, 70s, it was through that period of time. I'd have to look it up to know for sure. But essentially Baha'is, because they believe that there was a prophet after Muhammad, the orders were to kill them on sight. And so my girlfriend and her friends and her family have a very different perspective on the Middle East than you would presume because she's brown and Iranian. And so, again, I've always gravitated towards people that break stereotypical molds, that are surprising, that are not what you would think they are to be based off of the cultural presentation, right? And so naturally, when you're surrounded by people with stories like that are interesting and different than the mainstream, your brain is going to evolve in a way where you're like, okay, well, let me find out who people really are. Let me not just jump to conclusions based off of how they look or their appearance or any of those things. And I feel like the real beauty of humanity lies in those nuances of understanding that not all Middle Eastern people are Muslim. Not all Middle Eastern people like the Middle East. And not all Middle Eastern people were against the travel ban. Like, most of the Middle Eastern people in my life were like, fuck yeah, that's why we left. Keep those people out of our country. And so, when white people hear that in America who have no cultural frame of reference, they go, oh, that's bigoted ideology. That's racism. We can't think like that. But you're not listening to people that actually fled murder and genocide. And you're not taking the time to understand that there is some nuance to this situation that might inform how we think about it. Because it's now affecting us in ways that it's affected other cultures for a long, long period of time.
Yeah, and you can tell where the least amount of thinking is, because it's the areas in which you're not allowed to even have a conversation about it, right? If you're not even allowed to talk about it, which it should indicate to you that this is driven by ideology, not actually a reasoned position.
Yeah, and nobody really wants to do their homework. They just kind of want to say, it's like lazy activism. Everybody goes, oh, well, those, we as America's racist, we don't like brown people. Those are brown people that want to come here and we're not letting them. End of story. And it's like, this is why we can't have productive dialogue in this country, because such a large portion of this extreme left, they don't want to hear any nuance. They just are willing to swallow whole the idea that everything we don't like comes from this innate desire of America to be racist. Meanwhile, in order to believe that, you'd have to ignore the fact, like, find me another developed country that has created more diversity of wealth than the United States. Like, there are Black billionaires, there are Latino billionaires, there are Middle Eastern billionaires that came up in this country. I mean, there's not a better country on the planet than what we're doing. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. But we're doing a lot of things better and we're doing a lot of things right. And I think you have to overlook a lot of that to believe some of this bullshit that's on the extreme left.
Hey, I have can I read something to you guys?
Yeah.
You made me think. This is the only thing I know about Baha'i is a quote, one of my favorite quotes that actually I found it during a time of grief, and it really spoke to me. And I come back to it whenever I'm grieving something. And it's who said this? Abdul Baha.
Abdul Baha. Yeah.
Abdul Baha. I don't know enough about Baha'i faith, but I like this quote a lot. And it actually applies to what I think you're going through in some ways, because you're going through a struggle of trying to gain employment while people are actively trying to get you fired. But the quote is, the more difficulties one sees in the world, the more perfect one becomes. The more you plow and dig the ground, the more fertile it becomes. The more you cut the branches of a tree, the higher and stronger it grows. The more you put the gold in the fire, the purer it becomes. The more you sharpen the steel by grinding, the better it cuts. Therefore, the more sorrows one sees, the more perfect one becomes. That is why in all times, the prophets of God have had tribulations and difficulties to withstand. The more often the captain of a ship is in the tempest and difficult sailing, the greater his knowledge becomes. Therefore, I am happy that you have had great tribulations and difficulties. For this, I am very happy that you have had many sorrows. Strange it is that I love you, and still I am happy that you have had sorrows. I love that quote. Anyway,
yeah.
Not to bring it down, but I think it's like you're going through this. You were joking beforehand when you were talking about, I said, oh, I used to work in comedy. And you're like, I used to work in comedy too.
So true.
But all these tribulations or all these things for anybody who's watching who may be afraid of, like, gosh, yeah, I don't want to say what I think. I don't want to get fired. I don't want to have, those things sharpen you and they make you stronger. And it's like that Bible verse about, what is it? Sacrificing your soul to gain the world. So I don't think that sacrificing yourself and your beliefs and your character is worth all the stuff, all the riches that you could obtain.
Yeah. And I mean, and I try to be very transparent about the fact that, like, I am not some valiant warrior about these things. Like, I don't wake up every day like, yeah, I'm ready to suck the day's dick and fucking kick it in the ass. I am not like one of these overly optimistic, like super. I'm not The Rock. I don't wake up every day like I'm ready to fight the world's battles. Like, it's tough. It's shitty. It sucks. And every battle I've ever had to fight, I've been drawn into reluctantly. But my philosophy, once I get there, is like, all right, well, if we're going to do this, then I'm going to put all my brain power and all my willpower behind it and do my best to fight the battle as best as I can. I mean, it's just, and I believe that's more of a realistic thing than a lot of things. I bet a lot of times the guys who end up running and burning buildings to save people thought about it a few times before they did it. I don't think everyone just so instinctually is ready to go to war for the things that they think are right. But ultimately, you're either compelled to do these things or you're not. And I've always been a guy who, even with hesitation or reluctance, have been compelled to do these things. And I guess so if I have a message out there for people, it's, if you don't feel heroic instantaneously when the world puts a challenge upon you like that, that's okay. It's okay not to feel like, oh yeah, well, I'm ready to go fight all the battles and I'm ready to sacrifice everything and I'm ready to risk everything and lose everything. None of us really feel that way. None of the people that are thrown into these things are like, fuck yeah, can't wait to get fired from everything and not be able to get hired for anything. And like one of my friends said they were like, oh yeah, like you're like the tech era's Lenny Bruce. And I was like, if only I had that fucking confidence and that excitement about myself. Like, I don't think of myself that way. It's very hard to get amped up to go, boy, life's going to kick me in the dick again today, but I guess I'm fucking game for it. Like, you just have to keep forging ahead. And the thing that I just keep going back to is like, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not doing anything intentionally malicious. So, you know, I feel like I'm in the right. I feel like I'm doing what's right. And I feel like I'm fighting for what's right. And I am afraid that if people like me don't put their foot down when shit like this happens, it's going to get worse. And, you know, and I do believe that America is in a different place than it was when I went through my first case in 2013. I think in 2013, if we were looking at this same case, I would think about sitting in front of a jury and going, man, I don't know. People might be so squeamish about, you know, my jokes or things that I've said that maybe they would rule against me. I think America's so fucking tired. And Carter, we talked about this beforehand. I think Donald Trump got elected primarily for one reason and one reason alone. It was because people don't want to be told what's appropriate anymore. And I think a lot of the protest vote for Donald Trump was like, fuck you. I don't care if he grabs people by the pussy. That's his thing. And as long as he didn't commit a crime, then it's fine. And I like that he owns it. And I like that he didn't apologize. And I like that he said, yeah, you know, my brand is grabbing people by the pussy. That's what I do. That's what I've done for 40 years. And you guys loved it before I tried to be your president.
Yeah, I mean, he is cultural. He's a cultural weapon. That's all he really is. You know, if I look at why I think he won, I think it was really just some people wanted to wield a cultural weapon against this kind of leftist craziness, including the mainstream media, but just generally. And, you know, he's that weapon. I don't think people loved his policies per se. I mean,
that's the conclusion I came to, because I don't want to repeat myself. We talked about it, but I didn't understand why he won, and I was really devastated. And I started trying to figure out why he won. I came to that same conclusion eventually. Was that the big, because especially to trying to explain the people who voted for Obama and then jumped to Trump, why did that happen? And in my echo chamber, the answer was, oh, it's sexism and racism. I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. These people, they were happy to vote for Obama, but then they voted for Trump. Why? And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of factors, but I think one of those big factors is that he is not swayed by the PC mob.
Yeah.
He doesn't care.
Well, look, if you're in an ideology that believes Candace Owens can be a white supremacist, then it's pretty easy to say, well, people are racist who voted for Obama. Like, okay. But yeah,
I didn't vote for Obama in 2008 and 2012 because he was black. I voted for him because he seemed like the first person in my lifetime who was smart enough and professional enough to be a president. I was like, oh, this guy talks like he's actually not stupid. And so I like him. And I voted for him. What's that?
That's a nice change from the Bushes.
Yeah, of course. Like, you know, fool me once, you know, shame on me, fool me. Like, you're just not going to fool me again. Like, I remember watching that clip and be like, this guy's full retarded, right? and I remember when they came into that, everyone talks about, like, imagine being George Bush when they came into that children's school while he was reading to them and tell him about 9/11. And I bet that motherfucker was sitting there going like, so do I like finish the book, or should we just shut it down now and get right into war mode? Because
wasn't the book up?
It was a pop-up book.
Down?
Oh yeah, I don't remember. He's like, it's a pop-up book or something. He's like, listen, he's like, look, this sounds important, but this cat in his head, I got to see where this shit's going. Cause you know, it's exciting, right? Like the cat, the hat, I don't know. We got to figure it out. I'm not going to leave these kids hanging. That's for sure. Them towers ain't going to grow back if I quit this book now. So there's a movie. We can put the movie on for him. Okay. It's a horrible George Bush. It's just redneck white guys sound the same.
I mean, yeah, it's the generic redneck.
Yeah, just generic, stupid, you know, it's Southern guy voice. But yeah, 100%. And it's the same thing. Like I didn't think Donald Trump got in because people were listen. Donald Trump for 30 years. Almost 40 years now, has been the poster boy for American capitalism. Look at this fucking rich kid who's running around New York with supermodels with fake tits and blonde hair, and he's flying in his own private jets, and he's fucking crazy. We love it. Well, that's the same shit that got him elected. You can't make this guy the poster child of America for half of our lives and then be surprised that he wins the presidency of the United States. This is where I agree with Gavin McInnes. He said, when Trump says, let's make America great again, he's not talking about pre-Civil War slavery. He's talking about the 80s. He's talking about when like Coke ads were chicks in bikinis and people's aspirations were to buy Corvettes. And now if your friend buys a Corvette, you're like, Jesus Christ, dude, what's wrong with you? You got a Coke problem? What's going on? Like, something happened?
No, I would. I'll vote for anyone who brings the 80s back. Yeah,
I mean, so like, back in the golden era of what it was to be American, like when people from other who was the kind of American that made all those immigrants want to come here in the first place? Donald Trump. They looked at this guy and they go, look, he has everything. I want some of that. I'm going to go to America. So you, if anybody is to blame for the mass immigration, it's people like Donald Trump who really sold the American dream. That's why I laugh when people get mad about immigration in general, not illegal immigration. It's a separate thing, but it's like, you can't advertise America as the Disneyland of countries for 200 years and be surprised that everybody wants to come.
Right.
I mean, that's a natural byproduct of how great we are. But because of that, you've got to lock it in and you got to do it right.
Yep. I mean, and the gaudiness and ostentation that's part of Trump's brand. So to suddenly be shocked that he's like crass, gaudy, and ostentatious. It's like, where have you been?
We've been voting. We didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. We've been voting for him for 40 years. Every time we buy a magazine he was on the cover of, every time you watched him on Oprah, every time people tuned into The Apprentice, they've been voting on Donald Trump for 40 years. And the guy has been winning for 40 years. So the cultural phenomena, I don't know that it could have ever happened with another guy. And I don't think the landscape of presidential candidates will ever be the same again. I predicted two things before the election. At the first debate against Hillary Clinton, I predicted two things. I said he's going to win. He's going to win this general election because she's acting like she has it in the bag and America's turned off by that. The other thing I said is it will be the last two-party election that we ever have. And I believe that this next general will have three final candidates debating up until the election. There will be three representatives. The third candidate will be an independent Bernie Sanders.
Oh, really?
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting.
I don't know. I think it would happen, but I don't know if it'll happen in this election. I think because I think the Democrats still think they have a chance. I think they need to get beat one more time before people realize that this is not going well for them. I mean, because the Democratic Party they're no longer the old Democratic Party. They've been taken over by social justice warriors. So they're kind of the crazy left at this point.
Yeah, you've got people, they are so delusional about walk away. Like I said, my friend Mike, who's part of LGBT walk away panel, I've met so many walk away people in the past year, liberals, and not everyone's walking to the Republican Party. I didn't. I became an independent, but it happened since the last election. I didn't vote for Trump in 2016. There's a ton of people who are, the party is bleeding voters, but they're just delusional about it. They would rather stick their head in the sand and pretend like it's all Russian bots or something. I have to go soon, just so you know. I have a friend arriving with a dog to meet my dog, and
we can wrap it up soon.
I like to. We're supposed to believe Keri's not on the extreme left anymore. You have a dog-on-dog appointment? Okay.
It's a doggy date.
Seems pretty leftist to me. I mean, I was going to comment on the hat, but the dog date says it all.
I'm not a cat lady, though. I'm a dog lady.
No, I have a lot of holdover from your previous life, Keri.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. She's definitely still in the cocoon phase of the transition. My
belted you, Keri. By the way,
no. It's just she's still got a lot of that SJW caterpillar in there. She's about to flourish into a liberated butterfly. No, my election prediction is, and I think this is interesting, but I think this is how it could go down. And I made this prediction on my podcast, so we'll see if it holds true. I think it'll come down to Harris/Booker. I think it'll be Harris. I think Bernie will run independent. I think Trump will run as the incumbent, obviously. And wouldn't it be interesting if Trump or Bernie wins the popular vote and the other one has the majority of the Electoral College, but nobody gets to 270 and the Democratic House votes in the third place candidate which will be their system Democrat of Kamala Harris. So my prediction is that's exactly what will happen. And then the American public will go, okay, so do we go to war because now we officially have a government that's not representing the interest of the people? They didn't pick the independent who won the popular vote. They didn't pick the Republican candidate or the incumbent candidate who won the majority of the Electoral College. They just picked their own person. And they are completely legally allowed to do that if nobody gets to 270. I think that's a very realistic possibility for the 2020 election.
Let's hope not, because I don't know that would go well.
No, it would definitely revolt. It would that isn't it funny how when you look at the Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan's vision was that we'd have to create this omnipotent enemy in order to bring people together, right? What if the omnipotent enemy isn't a space alien? It's our own government. And what if the thing that brings the American people together is the recognition that our government is out for itself and not the interest of the people? And what if the thing that brings us together is dethroning our own system of government? Possibility.
I could get behind that, I think.
Yeah, you got guns, man? Because I'm getting some guns. No, just
Of course we have guns.
Yes. I'm on eBay looking for guns right now. Apparently, I just go to a trade show and get 8 machine guns. So I'm going to do that later today.
Well, just as an FYI to everyone, the barrel and slide of a lot of weapons is not what's controlled; it's the receiver, and the receiver can be 3D printed with plastic. So
nice.
Get yourself a good quality 3D printer that can print basically the equivalent of Glock receivers.
That is the whitest way to get a gun I've ever heard. Listen, you don't want a gun. You could go get a gun at your local CVS parking lot for $200. What you need is a $4,500 3D printer. You can make all the guns you want. Oh, that sounds easier. This is what happens when white people don't have any black friends. I have enough black friends. I go get you want some guns? I'll go get you 2 guns by 3 o'clock today with polish.
Really? Let's talk after.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we should wrap it up here. So, thank you everyone for watching Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. Let's see. Follow us, please. Subscribe on YouTube, Unsafe Space, and we'll see you next week. We broadcast live every week at 11 a.m. Pacific time, and sometimes we don't have technical issues. So we'll see you again next week. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the people that braved the chat. And
thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Oh, wait. Before I go, after I said all of that, how should people follow you, Josh? What's the...
You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Denny, or on Instagram at Josh Denny, or on Facebook at Josh Denny Official. Or you could go to my website, joshdennycomedy.com, which is drastically overdue for a makeover. So that's something I got to do in the next couple of weeks. But those are all the places that people can find me. And then the best way to follow my dates, if you want to see some shows, I'm working on potentially doing some shows this spring coming up. So if you want to track those dates and see when they're announced, you can follow my fan page on Facebook, and you'll get all the updates for any potential shows in your area.
Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much again for coming, and we will see everyone next week at 11 on Thursday.